This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Doc and JD, Houston's own dynamic duo, comes right out of the Wild West. A tale of two cops who tamed a part of Houston with respect and fairness. Two cops who just had a feel for the women of the night.
Okay, well, I'm Michael Egbert. I live in Lamoni, Iowa. I moved here when I retired from law enforcement in 2006. And I always wanted to come back to my roots after I retired. And I was in law enforcement for 33 years. What got the inspiration for this particular book was a couple of years ago, my wife and I had gone down to Texas to attend the high school graduation of our granddaughter. And on the way back home, I said, well, let's go by Austin and see my old partner, JD. I hadn't seen him in 20 years. And we got to sit there talking, he and I, talking about the special assignment we had. And while we were talking, just reminiscing all this stuff, we noticed our wives were sitting there on the edge of their seats, glued to our stories. So the next thing I know, JD says, well, we ought to write a book. So I start writing a chapter, and I got a few chapters written, and I asked JD how he was coming along in his part, and he says, well, he hadn't done anything. And I said, oh, okay. I finished the book, basically, myself, and so I asked JD, so if you want to contribute something, how about writing the forward? So he did that. And what happened was we're working in Houston PD, and we got to the special assignment. It was the first time either one of us had ever ridden together in a patrol car. And then the sergeant just says, Poor Patrol. I said, what? This is the first we'd ever heard any of this.
Poor Patrol as in prostitute?
Yeah. And we thought, well, what's going on here? So it's a special assignment. We want you to go out and focus your attention on the prostitutes and the people hanging around them. We're getting all these complaints from the homeowners and stuff all up and down this stretch of road called Telephone, which was 7 miles long. That was the name of the road called Telephone. And we asked the lieutenant, and I said, well, what are we supposed to do? He says, I don't care how you handle it. Just go out there and do something, because we're getting all these complaints. And we didn't have enough officers to devote a lot of time to one particular problem. It was like the Old West. There were shootings every night and total mayhem and chaos. 5 previous officers that had been killed in the line of duty all worked Telephone Road area. Our first night on the street, we ended up making over 30 arrests. We thought, wow.
What did you do that nobody else had done?
Focusing our attention on them and the problem that they were creating. We identified 4 locations along Telephone Road that we considered hot spots. And we just swooped in there and disrupted their party, so to speak, and it got to the point where JD and I looked at each other and we thought, I'm having a good time with this. This is fun. We're actually getting to do something out here. One thing we found out, to be a prostitute, you did not have to be pretty. All you had to be able to do was just perform a service. And one that gave us that information was Doris, who was probably the homeliest woman I'd ever seen in my life. In fact, she was home, and I thought she was a man in drag. Okay. But she was underscoring the other prostitute because they had a going price for different services. And she actually had a line of guys waiting for their turn. Her panty was so dirty that she had to peel it off. Oh. I thought, you got to be kidding me. Then JD and I looked at each other and we thought, and she's out there making money.
All right, that lesson learned.
And I've had sales all the way from Europe to all across the United States. I have some friends, and some people put it on the Facebook, and next thing you know, I've got sales coming in from places I wasn't even aware of, and it just surprised me.
So other people are posting about your book?
Yeah, that's what surprises me about it.
Wow.
Because apparently it's that good. We were doing 10 times above the average police officer as far as arresting reports and stuff like that goes. And so that came to the attention of the news media. And one of the reporters from it was called the Houston Post at the time, asked it for permission to come out and ride with us one night. And so he did. He rode one shift. He saw things and heard things that he never knew it went on. We never got accused of brutality or any of that sort, because we never exceeded our authority, for one thing.
So what made you special?
I guess it was because we showed respect for these people, which is something they weren't used to getting.
Oh.
We got to realizing that they were actually humans. None of those ladies were in that profession because they grew up wanting to be in that profession. They were there due to circumstances they couldn't control.
But you had to
whether
arrest them
it be,
anyway.
oh yeah, and they understood that because
Wow.
we were fair and we were just, and they respected that.
Yeah.
Even our chief was surprised
Right.
that, and the crime got to the point where, for the first time in many years, we brought crime to a standstill, right to its knees,
Wow.
along Telephone Road. It was, in fact, it was the quietest part of town after we got done working there.
Michael, I think I hear a folk song. What a great story. Thank you. A homebound teacher and librarian turns the love of a unicorn into a real teaching moment, reminding us unicorns and children come in all different colors and backgrounds.
Hello, I'm Julia Palin. I live in Blacksburg, Virginia, and I'm a school librarian, so I love books. My inspiration for Laney's Unicorn was the wonderful imagination of children, and a lot of children love unicorns. So I thought, what better way to address the imagination of children with a story about unicorns? My book is about Laney, and she lives in a city. She lives with her mother and grandmother, and they live in an apartment. And I based this story on some children I knew in South Carolina, even though they didn't live in a big city. I chose to put Laney in a city, and she grows to love unicorns more and more as time goes by. She finds a little unicorn at a dollar store, and her mother buys it, and then she takes the opportunity wherever she goes to see movies about unicorns, to collect a few unicorns, those kind of things. So the unicorn is kind of a symbol in the story of her tenacity, her imagination, and her growth. She grows in the story from a little 3-year-old up until an older child. And her mom has to go to prison. And so the unicorn symbolizes her hope for her mother to get out of prison. Life goes on, and she develops a wonderful character, which is shown in the story. And then in the end, her mom gets out of prison. And during the time her mom was in prison, every time she went to visit her, she did a picture of a unicorn. And she didn't leave the pictures at the prison. She always brought them home. So in the end of the story, Laney actually puts the pictures all over her room to welcome her mother home. And this actual event, once I was in the library and a little girl came up to me and she said, "Miss Allen, we're having a party for my mom." And I said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Is it her birthday?" And she said, "No, she's getting out of prison today." So that's really stuck in my mind. And so when I wrote this story, I thought a lot of women are incarcerated. And so this story is a story that might be helpful to both children and women who are incarcerated. And so it's a little bit for an older clientele of child. I'd say third grade on up. It could even be used in high school. So that's my story. And the illustrations are absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
They have wonderful illustrators, and Paige, they just did a great job. They gave me a selection of artists, and I picked one, and it's beautiful. And the unicorn on the cover is black. I decided that because it was an African American child, the unicorn would be black, and it's absolutely gorgeous.
Are you able to read your book to kids and generate interest that way?
Well, I'm working on that. I had big plans. I was supposed to do 2 festivals. I was going to be sharing my books, do readings at bookstores, going to libraries. God, I'm super disappointed. But so now I'm revamping my marketing. That's what I've been working on the past week or so, is revamping everything so that I can do some Zoom readings, and I finally got my website up, and that way I can do some more online marketing
Until this COVID gets out of here, right?
Right. I can't wait to get out there with the children. I do a front porch story thing. We have a historic house. I call it Front Porch Stories, where I sit on the porch of the old house and children come and I read stories. And now I have my actual own books to read to them. It's before I would do other people's books, which of course I love too. So we authors need to promote each other too. But anyway, I'm a real people person, so it's been difficult.
Well, hopefully we're coming out of this, Julia, so hang in there. How to tie in the pandemic with a book started 50 years ago with this story about going into the deep freeze while waiting for a cancer cure. The name of the book, Complex.
This is Mary Lons Kennedy, and I'd like to introduce myself and my brother, Thomas Lons. We are actually the authors of our new book that we put out. I live in West Palm Beach, Florida, and he's in Dewey, Arizona, which is kind of interesting because we've been kind of telecommuting on this book all along. Tom is a retired science teacher, principal, coach, and he was also a decorated combat veteran, and a little bit of that comes through in the book. And I'm a retired nurse. Tom wrote the initial draft of Complex, which is the name of the book, about 50 years ago. This was before the internet, cell phones, and sophisticated personal computers. Now, the book was released last summer, so we've been working on it for a while. And coincidentally, this was just a few months before our current pandemic struck. So the topic, I think, is even more relevant today than ever because we're all kind of taking our chances on the outside, and we all have to learn to count on each other. So the main idea of the book is that the main character, Mark St. Clair, is a successful young man, but he's been diagnosed with an incurable cancer. Now, his only hope is for a radical new procedure in a facility in Colorado, and he's hoping to find a cure down the road, maybe not immediately, but he's been frozen alive, and he's going to be thawed out when they find a cure for this. And when he wakes up, he gets a real interesting surprise there. And the story is actually a metaphor for what we are kind of as a society going through now, kind of confinement against our will and fear and constraints and powerlessness and uncertainty. And we're actually kind of all wondering when it will end, and is there a hope for the future? And if so, what will that look like? So our book is mostly for sci-fi fans, but also readers who enjoy adventure and medical mysteries and that type of thing. Now, both of us have individually published a few things, nothing as the magnitude of a book. And actually, my very first book signing, I sold all the books that I brought, which was wonderful. And I had some promotional pieces put out, even in my high school alumni magazine. So, yeah, we're reaching out to people and getting very good responses, which is a wonderful thing to be able to do online, especially now because people are looking for lots of new ways to kind of connect and to interact with other people. It's fun to say, what do you do in your retirement? Well, I've written a book, and here's the title. Here's a copy.
Yeah, feels pretty good. Thanks, Mary. An antique dealer in Barrington, New Hampshire for 50 years takes a deep dive into the stories behind his collections that you've probably never heard in his book entitled For Liberty I Live.
Hi, Alice. My name is Al Benting. The book I wrote is For Liberty I Live, which is a picture book about items in my collection that have to do with Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, and the Siege of Boston. And I find it's an interesting book for a very narrow audience. I've managed to research a lot of the people who owned the stuff as well as the items itself. And I find it interesting when I think about the people back in 1775. Were they different from us or the same as we? Emotionally, physically, and so on. As it turns out, the average kid in the colonies was 3 inches taller than their British counterparts because they ate better and they had a better life. Some of the guys are relatively important yet very obscure characters. Like there's a guy named Reuben Brown from Concord who on April 19th, 1775 was making cartridge boxes for the colonial troops, and the British, when they came to Concord, they burned his house. The colonials were able to put it out, but his workshop was lost. And it's interesting, he had 2 little kids, and his commander in Concord asked him to ride west to tell other Americans what was going on. And he met his wife and two little kids in the street, and he said, "Go hide in the woods until this is over. You'll be safe there with the old people." And he rode off. Well, think about these people. There's no insurance on this stuff. There's no insurance that the wife and kids will be okay even. They were terrible times. And the Americans still consider themselves to be British subjects. It's just that they were sick of the British trying to rule them from 4,000 miles away, passing edicts that were generally unfair. There are other people in the book, like Captain John Parker. I happen to have his wife's Lyda Parker's sampler pictured in the book. And John Parker was a commander of the troops on Lexington Green. Now, they wanted to demonstrate the fact that they were upset. They didn't really expect to have an encounter. But if you think about Parker, he had friends in his double line of troops. But what were his orders? Did he put the young guys in the second rank so that perhaps they wouldn't be hurt? It's a real big question because we don't know the answer.
Yeah.
There's another guy who was actually a relative of mine named Joseph Robbins, and he was commander of one of the 3 militia companies from Acton at Concord Bridge. And he was standing right next to one of the other commanders who was the first man killed during the Revolution. And I have his gun.
So in your book, it's pictures, and you offer all of this background as well.
Oh, tons of it, yes.
I think that makes your book appealing to a much broader audience than if it was just a bunch of pictures.
Why, thank you. Now, my book actually isn't about any famous people. I've researched the guys as much as I can, but if you think about it, there's nothing left from April of 1775. No sounds, maybe a few scraps of paper, some moldering old leather, and a couple of shooting irons and so on. But that's it. And I think it's important to try to figure out what was going on, what was in their minds back then. Because people basically aren't any different now than they were then. And these people, especially, throughout the Revolution, well, throughout history, have done a lot for us. And we need to revere that.
Yes.
And if we forget, I think our nation is doomed.
Well, that's something to think about as we take a very short break. This is the Page Publishing Book Club.
Attention all authors. Page Publishing is looking for authors. Have you written a book and want to get it published? Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, Apple iTunes, and other outlets. They handle all aspects of the publishing process for you: printing, cover art, publicity, copyright, and editing. Call 800-204-6099 now for your free author submission kit. That's 800-204-6099 for your free author submission kit.
We're back on the Page Publishing Book Club. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. A reporter's quest to uncover the truth leads him into a lion's den of deception with gangs, political rivals, and an unsolved murder in Roxbury Rumbles.
Hi, I'm Dennis Allen. I live in Idaho Falls, Idaho. I'm a retired Air Force officer and a college administrator. And I was inspired to write this particular book by seeing the sometimes destructive forces which divide and degrade, and yet the collective and individual efforts of those who reach out to unite and lift us. Roxbury Rumbles is about a young black reporter, Alonzo Martinez. He is caught between these two opposing forces, and the book is about his quest to discover the truth. He's placed in an environment and then in a dangerous situation that alters his initial views on life. He's compelled to record the murder of a black businessman, a respected man whom he knows and who is running for political office. And the assailant who kills this black businessman is dressed up as a policeman. And the edited video that surfaces after he has recorded this situation causes some civil rioting, looting, and arson. And that's happening now in the United States, as a matter of fact. So this book is actually quite appropriate for this time. Alonzo knows much more, however, because he recorded the murder than the public does, and he begins a quest to discover who the murderer is, and he walks the dangerous path between rival gangs and corrupt cops and political adversaries. So he is looking for truth, and he wants to find out exactly who this assailant is to bring a little bit of peace to his own mind and to the community itself.
How is he able to film the murder of a businessman?
He is assigned to work in a depressed environment, Roxbury, which is a suburb of greater Boston area. And there's some crime in that area. And so he's apprehensive about that crime because he grew up in a more safe rural environment. So he's not very comfortable in that environment. But he's looking to establish himself as a world-class reporter. And so he needs a breakout story for that. And he is asked to video a confrontation between two rival gangs. And as a result, things turned out differently than was planned.
I see.
I've attended a book signing, and I have also have a website and a Facebook page where I promote my music and other books that I have written. And then I have children here and there that I would like to visit and do some book signings where they live as well, too.
There you go. Have a working vacation, Dennis.
Yes, uh-huh.
All right, thank you. Imagine a president with magical powers who's hooked up with a vampire tribe, and you've got the idea behind our next book, POTUS, a political fantasy in 3 parts.
This is T.C. Owen. I live in Jacksboro, Texas. I'm a retired English teacher on the junior and senior college level. I've always been interested in politics and government in general, and I guess it was in 2008 when I was looking around while I was teaching and talking to people, and I got a sense of something was amiss, and I wrote a little piece called A State of the Union Address That Will Never Be Heard, and that set off the whole thing. And a little bit later on, after my wife died, I retired. I was looking for something to do, came back to that, and then just started writing the book. And the title of the book is POTUS, a political fantasy in 3 parts. Part 1 is just the basic narrative of a guy who's already been elected president, and the book from then on goes back and forth to fill in the blanks on how he got there, why he got there, and what he's going to do with it all. And part 2 deals with what I call the Afghan Alamo, among other things, in which he suddenly gets blindsided by someone who gives him some magical powers that he can use in his job as president. Part 3 is called Vampire Interlude, and that's designed to display why and how and what he's up to by being kindred with a vampire tribe that no longer drinks human blood. And they help him in his various things on-world and off-world.
Is this intended as a commentary of sorts, or just a fantasy?
It's a little bit of both. The commentary is the baseline of the whole thing, is his desire to try to preserve freedom in this country, and in the process work to develop freedom in every country in the world. And the fantasy aspects show how he goes about doing that in conjunction with his natural and ordinary powers of persuasion. To come away with some ideas about freedom, which is the basic premise of the whole darn book, so that they can start thinking about it, and the fantasy aspects are to engage them so that they can see how these aspects might work in a real-time situation.
That is one creative mind you got there, TCO, and thank you. Well known for her storytelling skills, teaching children about animals through poetry was a natural for the author of Who Am I?
My name is Bernardina Weinmalen. I live in Plantation, Florida. I am retired. I am a poet, a storyteller, writer. It was a poem. I write a lot of poems. I've worked in a lot of schools and stuff. And a friend of mine was here, and she read it, and she said, girl, she said, that should be a book. She inspired me. Her name is Tony. And I just went for it. The book is about animals and children. And, you know, they get along so good together. And I was thinking about how would I do this? Because I already had the poem. I already had the writing. So I called my nephew who lives in the Netherlands, where I was born. And he said he would do the drawings for me if I tell him what I wanted. It's a story written in poetry. It rhymes, everything rhymes. And also they have to figure out until the end of the book what animal is in the book that I'm talking about. And some of them get it and some of them don't get it. They give me different names and it's really funny. It's very funny. For instance, who am I? My ears are long and floppy and my eyes are big and brown. When I eat, I'm sloppy. And when I'm mad, I wear a frown. My coat is thick and furry. My tongue is long and red. My nails are very sharp. And my nose is always wet.
So then the kids have to guess, who am I?
Yeah, and they also have to guess, the pictures that are in the book, they have to say what they are. But is it a tail, is it a foot, or is it a feet, or are they teeth, and where are they? They have to point to it. So it's like a little lesson to them too. The children and animals, watch them grow and play. They get along so beautiful in each and every way. Cats, hamsters, and rabbits eat right out their hands. Children and animals always being friends. Don't forget the dogs. They friends with everyone. Children and animals always having fun.
Great. Are you able to read this to kids?
Oh, yeah. I've read it to kids in schools and libraries and churches and wherever because I've done a lot of poetry.
So everybody knows who you are.
When I was living in Miami, everybody knew me.
Well, that's a nice feeling, Bernardina. Thank you. Okay, that is a wrap for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. Find the podcast at 710WOR.com and right on, everybody. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini.